Welcome to Fantasy Football Live, presented by Ram Trucks. Andy Behrens, Matt Harmon, Tera Roberts. I'm Jason Fitz. For the next hour, we are going to get you set with all the expertise you need. We're going to answer every question for you. And most importantly, we're going to calm you down, because week 2 is obviously the time when everybody gets calm. We all relax. We realize there were no overreactions. Andy Behrens, I've been on one all morning because I'm just having a terrible season so far. It's only 1 weekend. Save me from myself. Save us all from us. Tell us all it's going to normalize, and we're all going to be okay.
All of it? You want me to tell you that all of it's going to normalize? I am glad that we've had some regression from your fantasy game, right? We couldn't have had you going back to back as a fantasy champion. Thank goodness for that.
Thank you so much for reminding me that I was a champion, but also I'm still a champion. For all of this talk, like I won last year, I am still a champion until someone else is crowned. It's just doesn't look like that's going to be. Tera, you were supposed to take the reins and really come in as the newcomer and dominate, and I don't think it worked that way either for you. This is just bounce back week for you.
No, I failed miserably. I'm not feeling too confident this week. It's a learning curve here. I think I'm going to take over by week 5, then go on a hot streak, and then just demolish everybody. So just give me a couple weeks of being a loser, and then we'll be good to go.
Yeah, the most important thing that you'll learn quickly is that the bigger Matt Harmon is smiling at the beginning of his show, the more he knows he's got me under his thumb. That happened this week. Matt, the domination was yours in week 1, and I can already feel the swagginess coming from you, my friend.
Well, I appreciate that. But, as a real winner, I'm not going to sit here and try to dunk on you or any of that stuff. I'm just going to let this play out. Okay, yeah, do I have confidence over the course of the season? Absolutely. But it's a long year. Okay, and that's the message to all of you out there with your fantasy teams, too. Maybe week 1 didn't go the way you wanted to, but it's a long year. Don't give up yet. I mean, maybe if you took Christian McCaffrey first overall, you can – I'm not telling you to totally give up, but, we'll talk about it. You can maybe start looking at what you're going to be doing in January and December and all these months. Maybe you're not going to make it all the way, but, hey, for the rest of you out there, there's still some time.
All right, if you're watching on YouTube, get your questions in on the chat. We've got people monitoring it. We'll get them in throughout the course of the show. You can also use the hashtag AskFFL. Our very own Scott Pianowski answering questions on X right now, so you can get your questions answered. And we're going to answer a bunch of questions in this show. We'll give you some of the guys we've got our eyes on, some of the plays that you might be able to make, some of the substitutions you might need. And part of that is based on the actives and inactives. Let's take a look at some of the news around the league, especially some of these names you've heard, Christian McCaffrey, obviously put on injured reserve. It looks like it's at least 4 weeks with that Achilles injury. Puka Nacua, IR, also 5 to 7 weeks. Hollywood Brown, injured reserve shoulder for the rest of the season. Matt Harmon, as our resident wide receiver expert, what should everybody do with this Puka Nacua news?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you have Puka Nacua, you just got to be prepared for a long absence here. And honestly, the good thing is, if you want some silver lining here, you probably ended up taking Puka in the first round. You probably ended up taking him in the second round, early second round. Not a lot of great picks in the first round so far. I mean, Tyreek Hill's probably not going to have his quarterback for an extended time. Christian McCaffrey is going to miss some time here. Bijan Robinson, even Falcons' offense did not look great in week number 1. A.J. Brown has now been ruled out for Monday night's game. He was a consensus first-round pick. So everybody's dealing with these sort of landmines. I think if you have Puka Nacua on your roster, obviously there are some Rams receivers that you can pick up. We talked about those extensively on the podcast this week. I like DeMarcus Robinson if you have to grab somebody, because I've seen proof of concept of his role in this offense as the vertical X receiver, had the highest average depth of target among these receivers in week 1. I think he's probably not going to play the Puka role. Nobody's going to play the Puka role, but I think he will get a target bump here as well. But really I would be scanning all of these receiver rooms that are kind of murky here in week 2 to see if somebody steps up and we continue to get answers as someone you could potentially replace Puka with long-term in your lineup.
Yeah, instead of poly positive, I'm going to make it Puka positive, because you made all of that so positive for everybody that has Puka. All right, let's take a look at some of the actives, inactives from the main slate of games. We've got Jaden Reed active. He was added to the injury report Friday with the calf injury, but he is active. Kenneth Walker inactive in this game. Jameson Williams active. T. Higgins doubtful with that hamstring injury. We'll see what that Jameson Williams injury looks like. We'll answer some questions on that coming up. But let's also look at the primetime actives, inactives that we know right now. Some big names here that impact a lot of you. Rome Odunze tracking to play, according to Adam Schefter. Keenan Allen, a game-time decision. And we have from Tom Pelissero the breaking news. A.J. Brown has gone from questionable to out for Monday night. A.J. Brown not going to play Monday night. So, Andy Behrens, what's the level of panic now around the A.J. Brown draftees?
Yeah, I will say it's not a silver lining. This is bad news. There's nobody available on the waiver wire who's going to perform like A.J. Brown. But you get enough clarity here that, if you were worried about, do I have to start somebody today, or should I take this all the way up till Monday night and then maybe get stuck starting like Darnell Mooney or Ray McLeod? You don't have to do that anymore. You've got the full slate of games today ahead of you to replace him. So I guess that's good news. But of course, if you have A.J. Brown on a roster, this is going to be an ongoing concern. I'm glad that Philadelphia is being this conservative and not allowing him to aggravate it, re-injure it, make it any worse this week. And I'm glad that we have clarity before the start of the Sunday slate.
Let's also remind everybody that sometimes the most important thing you need to be in the NFL to be successful is healthy. And we've seen repeatedly Super Bowl champions are the teams that are at the low end of the games missed by starters list. So that's not going to be the case here. All right, let's get to some top fantasy storylines going into week 2. Everybody's excited about week 2. We're going to give you some of the best storylines out there. Matt Harmon, you get to go first. What do you got for us?
Yeah, one thing I want to discuss is that Rashee Rice, Chiefs wide receiver, is really shooting up rest of season rankings here. We saw at the beginning of the show, we talked about it, that Marquise Brown is out. Probably, it sounds like maybe for the rest of the season, he is on IR. I've seen some big brain fantasy analysts kind of saying, oh, this doesn't impact Rashee Rice. He was already on the rise anyways. I think a really good receiver getting removed from the offensive projection for the rest of the season does, in fact, push more volume to Rashee Rice. But he was already going to get a ton of targets anyways. I do understand that. ESPN's Mina Kimes said this week that defenses played too high coverage 60% of the time in week 1. Just 5 years ago, that rate was 38.4%. You watch Rashee Rice in week 1 just get slant after slant after slant, crossing routes over the middle of the field, dig routes, and that was really in line with what he did as a rookie as well. When I charted him for reception perception, 38% of his routes were slant routes. That was the most I've charted for any receiver since 2014. And it makes so much sense with this offense that regardless of Hollywood Brown being out there, they have Xavier Worthy. Patrick Mahomes is behind center. There's going to be so much space in that middle of the field for Rashee Rice to just cook against zone coverage on these in-breaking routes. I think he's going to catch over 100 passes this year. He might even compete to lead the league in receptions this year. So if you drafted Rashee Rice, especially if you got any sort of discount on him because of the potential suspension, that it's certainly not an issue right now. We'll see if it crops back up later on. You're looking pretty good. You probably got yourself a really big discount on that one.
I hope you've got the right team but the wrong player is the guy that has Xavier Worthy in all of my leagues. All right, Tara, give us a fantasy storyline you were excited about in week 2.
I am excited about trying to figure out just how bad this Carolina defense is. I know that sounds awful to be excited about, but from a fantasy perspective, it's very intriguing for us because you're wondering, is this the type of defense that week after week after week, we're just going to be able to roll out anyone and everyone against them? 21.3 fantasy points allowed to Derek Carr last week. That was the 6th most to opposing quarterbacks overall last week. And for reference, to understand just how dramatic that was, because maybe that number doesn't stand out as being massive compared to something like Anthony Richardson, but for reference, Carr only reached that number twice last year. So this was a fantastic performance and amazing that Carolina allowed that. Over 30 fantasy points allowed to the running backs for New Orleans last week, 2nd most fantasy points allowed last week at the position, most fantasy points allowed to tight ends. I could go on and on and on. Even the kicker went off against Carolina. That's how insane it was. And that was before they lost Derek Brown, arguably their best defensive player. I just don't see any scenario where this gets any better. We could be facing maybe one of the most historically tilted fantasy defenses ever. I feel like I'm not being even dramatic on that one. So I'm just kind of curious. I think this is a good gauge here. This young Chargers receiving core going up against this Carolina defense. We've got J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. This game right here will determine outcomes from a fantasy perspective for us for the entire year.
And by the way, Andy Behrens loves that you brought a kicker reference into this. I should remind everybody that technically last year the Panthers had the first overall pick in the draft. It went to the Bears via trade. It's only 1 week in, but the Panthers look like they could be historically bad. We've never seen a team in any sport with the top overall pick in the draft 3 consecutive years. And the Panthers look like they could do that. All right, Andy, give us a fantasy storyline you're pumped for.
Well, first of all, I'd love to see us referencing a kicker in the A block, and it wasn't even me. I didn't even do it. That's great. I'm looking at where the rookie class goes from here. The list of most dropped players this week at Yahoo Fantasy is loaded with rookies. Fantasy managers are always, hilariously impatient, so this is no huge surprise. We saw very few notable performances by rookies in opening week. Jaden Daniels was pretty nice on the ground. Brian Thomas caught a touchdown, but it wasn't really great overall. A lot of discussion about Caleb Williams, who had a few near misses in opening week, Marvin Harrison Jr., who couldn't buy a target in opening week, and various running backs who were under-involved. For me, what we get in week 2 from Caleb, from Marvin, Daniels, Neighbors, Thomas, this is the biggest fantasy storyline of the week. No surprise that a Bears fan would feel that way. One thing that happens in fantasy every year is that we recommend a bunch of rookies as sleepers and stashes, and then when they do not immediately pop in opening week, they just get mass dropped. And then a bunch of them become mid-season success stories for somebody else. So that is happening again, Fitz. It is the circle of life in fantasy.
Yeah, and speaking of circle of life, it takes me to my top fantasy storyline. Every year we talk about the lack of preseason, right? And we all know that impacts the beginning of the season. Yet every year, everybody freaks out. And this year, particularly after week 1, when you look at some of the wide receiver production, when you look at some of the quarterback production, it's easy to look across the board and say, what the hell happened to offense in week 1? And the real answer to that is it's going to normalize. We saw a historic low for average passing yards in the NFL in week 1. I do not believe that that's a trend that's going to continue. What you saw were a lot of teams that were out of sync. Quarterbacks didn't have great rhythm with their receivers. Offensive lines didn't play particularly well. Calm down, everybody. It's going to be fine. It's just going to take a couple of weeks before we see some of these offenses start to explode. They will explode. They always do explode. But I think we need to understand that there's a bell curve now in the NFL. The first 4 weeks are slow for offense. Then offense blows up and we think defense is dead. And then in December, defenses wake up and catch up. This is the process of the NFL every year. I can't believe I have to say it. But when you look at some of the ways people were reacting to who they should drop after one bad week, calm down. It's going to be just fine. All right, speaking of calm down, let's lock some things in. It's time to lock it in. Players with a tough matchup in week 2 who we still are confident will deliver. Tera, you are up first. Give me somebody you are ready to lock it in with.
I'm ready to lock it in with Aaron Jones, the RB1 over there, and coming off a very good game. Playing San Francisco this week, San Francisco actually did a very decent job last week against the run, allowing just 54 yards on 16 carries to Breece Hall, of all people. Hall still had a strong day with his receiving upside, 5 receptions for 39 yards. Not a ton, but it was just enough to get him by. He also got the touchdown on the ground. So while San Francisco isn't the best matchup in the world, I absolutely feel like that Aaron Jones is still someone that can absolutely exploit and give us a strong day from a fantasy perspective there. We've also got the situation of Sam Darnold being the quarterback here against San Francisco. They know him very well, and vice versa. So maybe the best way for Minnesota to attack this defense is just to rely on Aaron Jones to lead the way. And he is still someone that I absolutely want to lock it in with this week.
Yeah, if the Vikings look offensively like they did last week, boy, Nate Tice is going to be on one about the whole Sam Darnold thing. Matt Harmon, give us somebody that you're locking in.
Yeah, I'm going to lock in a guy who played that hideous Panthers defense last week that Tera talked about at the top of the show and actually didn't do anything, which I know has people freaked out. Chris Olave, New Orleans Saints wide receiver, going against a Cowboys defense this week that, if my respect level for the Panthers is somewhere down here around the floor at this point, after what I saw in week 1, I do think this Cowboys defense is going to be really good with Mike Zimmer kind of making some tweaks there, replacing Dan Quinn as the coordinator. But I think there's a lot of advantages going to Chris Olave's way, even if it didn't go, the targets didn't go his way in week 1, which is just kind of weird. It's a blowout. Things happen in those situations. But what I saw out of the Saints offense from a structure perspective last week was really encouraging. They used pre-snap motion on 88% of their plays. That was the most of any team in week 1. They were dead last in that metric last year. Then also Derek Carr play action on 40% of his dropbacks according to Pro Football Focus. Again, he was dead last in play action dropbacks last year. So these structural changes are good for an offense going against a strong defense, and also over the long term, I think will boost all of these offensive players. So if you have Chris Olave, you're bummed about what happened last week, you're nervous about this Cowboys matchup this week, I still think he's somebody you can play and expect high-end wide receiver 2 production bare minimum from.
Andy Behrens, who you locking in?
Yeah, for me, it's Dak Prescott. He had a quiet yet successful opening week, right? Only 1 touchdown pass. Rough matchup with Cleveland. He's got New Orleans today, and folks might feel reluctant to play him in a non-bye week. I'll just remind you that he did lead the NFL in touchdown passes and completions last year, put himself squarely in the MVP conversation. Dak also had some very good days against top defenses and playoff defenses too. And this year's offense is going to be no less reliant on CeeDee Lamb in the passing game. New Orleans was plenty impressive in opening week in a low degree of difficulty matchup that we've already talked about against Carolina. But Dallas is another story entirely. Also, Marshawn Lattimore banged up, not going to go today. That's huge news for CeeDee Lamb and the Dallas offense generally. An average day from Dak last year was 265 yards and 2 touchdowns. And those were numbers that almost no quarterback put up in opening week. So keep Dak Prescott parked in your starting lineup. Lock it in.
Yeah, by the way, not an average Sunday for him last week because he got $231 million guaranteed richer. All right, it's time to make your pick. We're going to let you guys chime in. Tara and I are going to figure some of these out. We'll look at some decisions you guys need help with. Tara, let's have a little bit of fun. I say a little bit of fun, but the first question comes from Sad Bay Area fan. That's just hard to have fun with Sad Bay Area fan. But he says, I have Amon-Ra, Rashee Rice, Marvin Harrison Jr., Brian Thomas Jr., and Brandon Ayuk. Start 3. Tera Roberts, what do you think?
Oh, gosh. First off, right off the bat, we are starting Amon-Ra St. Brown. I know last week was rough, and I get that can make anyone sad. It made me sad, even though I am a Jameson Williams truther. But we got to really rely on him to have a nice bounce-back week right here. You can't sit Amon-Ra, even if last week was subpar, so you got to go with him. And then when I turn to these other guys right here, Rashee Rice is someone who, again, we had the offseason issues with him, but as long as he is active, that is 100% someone that you want to lean into. So we've got Rashee Rice against the suspect Cincinnati defense. And then the last guy here, all of these guys a little bit underwhelming last week, and with the exception of maybe Brian Thomas, but I am leaning into Brandon Ayuk on this one. Last week, obviously coming off of the contract situation, he maybe wasn't in the best shape in the world. He had to ease back into it a little bit. So this week we expect more production from him. Those are the 3 that I would go with. The other 2 need to prove it to me a little bit more.
All right, let's get the next question. This one comes in from .com, who says, who should I start, DK Metcalf or Jay Williams? By the way, y'all going to have to help us. Like, there are a lot of Williams. We know you mean Jameson, but just help us out. Hashtag AskFFL. Isaiah Likely or D Swift in the flex. So asking you a couple of questions here. What do you got first on these wide receivers?
All right, we'll attack the wide receivers first there. It's DK. DK's production last week was obviously underwhelming, but there was an excuse for that. It was a bad matchup there. We're leaning into DK. Jameson playing, but dealing with the injury, so you do have to kind of take that into account there. You've got DK healthy. Go ahead, start him. Don't take the risk on Jameson this week when we're comparing these 2. For the others, the tight end versus the running back. Logic always says you don't start the tight end over the running back. Are we really flexing the tight end? But in this situation, we are flexing Isaiah Likely here over DeAndre Swift. I like DeAndre Swift heading into the season, but last week was a little bit concerning there. This Chicago offense really has to find itself before we can lean into them. Likely seems like the safer bet this week.
You forgot Likely's taking on the juggernaut known as the Raiders. All right, next one up. We got famous people that will listen to this show, obviously. Austin Powers, like it's got to be the Austin Powers for sure. Says CJ Stroud or Kyler Murray, and pick 2 flex, full PPR, Michael Pittman, Drake London, Jerome Ford. What do you think there?
Honored here to answer for Austin Powers. CJ Stroud and Kyler Murray, that is incredibly close right there. Kyler does technically have the better matchup here, but CJ Stroud, the reliability and dependability that we've seen out of him, we gotta lean CJ Stroud over Kyler Murray. Just a hair right there. It's the far safer pick. Now, when looking at these other options between Pittman, Drake London, and Jerome Ford, you got to eliminate London right off the bat. We need to see it before we can be able to start him over guys that we feel a little bit more like we can rely on. But when you're comparing Pittman to Jerome Ford, Pittman is a volume guy. He will get the targets. He was technically basically the lead receiver last week in terms of targets, but Jerome Ford probably has the safer floor here and the higher upside, especially in this matchup. So we are leaning Jerome Ford on this one by a smidge. Nice bet.
All right, now we get to take a little break. We get to go hit the bench, get a little water, because Andy and Matt have been doing nothing. So, Andy, Matt, take it away. It is time for Enough Already.
Yeah, let's have a little enough already. Let's talk about some situations, perhaps some narratives around the league that we're not entirely content with. Matt, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, I'm not content, Andy Behrens, with the amount of Bucs skepticism that was present both before the season and certainly even now after week 1. Look, I want to acknowledge two things. One, I want to acknowledge the fact that I mean what I say here. Like, I said this on Football 301. I had the Bucs winning the division, even though everybody was enamored with the Falcons. And I'm nervous about what I saw in the Falcons in week 1. That's for sure. But my second thing here is I do understand that what we saw in week 1 with the Bucs probably elevated by the Commanders defense, which may well be the worst defense in the league. But still, I watched that back on film, that offense, the way that they were designed. I thought Liam Cohen was cooking in week 1. We saw motion concepts. We saw bunch formations and stacks to get these wide receivers free. We saw routes that are purposely designed for where Baker Mayfield wants to attack, deep outside the numbers. We knew that Mike Evans did that last year. That was a success. But we also saw then Chris Godwin get in on that action in week 1. Rachaad White, he's not the most efficient runner in the world, but he is a useful pass catcher. So I just think that there's always this skepticism with the Bucs, and I've certainly been a Baker skeptic in the past, but watching him, just a solid quarterback in an offense that I think right now is very well designed, with an offensive line that's on the rise and a skill position group of players that is really got to be considered one of the best in the league. Like, enough already with the Bucs skepticism. I think we should be buying in on what we're seeing in Tampa.
I love it. The Baker disrespect is very real, and it's outrageous. For me, I'm going to go with the Marvin Harrison Jr. slander off of week 1. Enough already with that. We saw a ton of it on Fantasy Twitter, or Fantasy X, or whatever we're calling it, after he was kind of a quiet decoy in opening week. So much victory lapping by all the people who told you to fade the rookie in drafts. By the way, good move taking that victory lap while you could, actually. I totally respect that move. I think my favorite wild overreaction was people saying that actually Marvin Harrison Jr. is very slow because his next-gen top track speed on Sunday was like 16.7 miles an hour. Look, we have tracking data on Harrison from college, and within the past year, he clocked a top speed over 22 miles an hour. He can run. In fact, at Ohio State, he could do just about everything. Matt, you and Nate Tice had a great conversation, I thought, about Harrison on the Football 301 podcast this week, detailing the game conditions against Buffalo, the high winds, the specific routes that Harrison was asked to run. Would I personally like to see Arizona give him a few more layups, maybe some gimmicky touches? Sure, of course I would. Get the ball in his hands. He's a playmaker. I'm pretty sure better days are coming, though. The matchup this week against the Rams is pretty stellar. This Rams defense is not last year's Rams defense. So there's a lot to worry about in fantasy. We don't need to sweat Marvin having like a lineman speed, okay? Better days are coming. What else has got your attention, Matt?
Yeah, I'll stick in the NFC West here and say enough already with these people ruining Jordan Mason's big night with these "when were you told" questions. And I know this is not a popular stance for a fantasy analyst to make. I should really be caping up for all the people whose Mondays were ruined and their week 1s were ruined because a player who was listed as questionable all week didn't play. Yo, that's how it goes sometimes, okay? And I think, honestly, it was shameful. People harassing Jordan Mason and then harassing the team about him, especially Jordan Mason, bro. Like, this guy just has the biggest night of his career. He goes out and, is a huge part of why his team dominates on Monday Night Football. And by the way, if you're just a selfish fantasy football player, you get Jordan Mason now, okay? Like, if you picked up Jordan Mason, this is a guy we should be celebrating. We should be excited about. I am very excited about. I think rest of season, until McCaffrey is back, this is a guy you're playing every single week, right? Like, this is a huge good thing from a fantasy football perspective that we've got this guy who is good enough to hold down the fort while McCaffrey's not there. Did you get banged on the McCaffrey stuff a little bit? Sure. But I don't think that then we need to take this crazy stance about, oh, we were lied to and the 49ers owe us this, and Jordan Mason said that he was told he was starting on Friday. How come we didn't know that? I mean, give me a break. Enough already with that. Like, the kid has the best night of his career so far. It should be a time to celebrate him, not harass him about all these questions. Like, enough already with that nonsense.
Jordan Mason, great call by me in Primetime Picks. Okay, let's send it back to Fitz, who's back from break.
That is amazing. By the way, what I really heard there was Christian McCaffrey, system running back. Okay, let's turn to our fantasy game changers for this week, powered by Ram Trucks, where we're identifying some of the most impactful players in one of the top fantasy matchups on the schedule. We've picked the Sunday Night Football, Texans and Bears, oh my. We've got the Bears at the Texans, Houston favored by 6.5. The over-under on this, 45.5, a little lower than we saw last Sunday. So let's take a look at that matchup. Andy, who do you have that you're locked in on?
Yeah, for me, this has got to be Joe Mixon. He was the second highest scoring fantasy running back a week ago, and he might run that back in week 2. Remember, Tony Pollard had a huge week against Chicago, and the Titans offense doesn't really stress a defense at every level quite the way the Texans do. Mixon handled 33 touches in opening week. It led to 178 total yards. He has really always been a player capable of handling beefy workloads over extended stretches. Mixon gained 3.4 yards after contact per attempt in opening week, according to PFF. He had 4 runs over 10 yards, certainly passed the eye test. As a Bears fan, I fear we have another huge week for Mixon incoming. He's an obvious must start in this one. Houston just puts too many playmakers on the field for any defense to account for them all. Mixon is the kind of back who can really tilt a matchup in your favor.
All right, Tara, give him some hope. As a Bears fan, give Andy Behrens, the Bears fan, a little hope when you look at this matchup.
I was surprised he didn't pull this one right here. DJ Moore, big game incoming here. We talked about the injuries to the rest of the Chicago receiving core here. When we look at Chicago's game last week, they pulled out the win, obviously, but it was carried by defense. Offense was kind of unproductive across the board. Caleb Williams, just 14 of 29 attempts, only 93 passing yards and some on the ground. And DJ Moore was technically the leading receiver with 5 receptions for 36 yards. I don't know if we can theoretically call it the leading receiver there. Keenan Allen was actually the target hog, 11 total targets. Rome Odunze wasn't much of a factor here, but removing potentially those guys from the lineup, or at the very least them being slightly limited here, is going to greatly increase the upside here for DJ Moore. We already weren't seeing a lot of contributions from the tight ends here. The running backs didn't really contribute much from the past game. We've seen DJ Moore, even in difficult matchups, absolutely take over last year with Justin Fields. So is this the time where we see that massive 2023 boom DJ Moore game and Caleb Williams finally comes of age right here and DJ Moore is the guy that gets him there? That's the storyline that I'm kind of keying in here.
Just for the sake of Andy's joy, I want this in my life. Matt Harmon, give us the game changer for you.
Yeah, I'll go back to the good offense here that's going to be playing in this game and talk about the Texans wide receivers. Shock. Look, I think a lot of people are locked and loaded with Nico Collins after week 1. I think that's the right take. He is the #1 wide receiver in this room. But I want to focus on the other 2 guys here, Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell. And just note that I think all 3 of these wide receivers are in the circle of trust. They're players that we're going to start every single week. Is every week going to go great for Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell? And even Nico Collins, too. There's going to be some volatility. No, there's going to be ups and downs, but I think you're playing them every single week. And I think we got some real good clues about the roles for Diggs and Dell after week 1. Like, I've seen some freaking out, some consternation about Stephon Diggs. Like, oh, he only had 8 or 9 air yards. He averaged fewer than 2 yards or 2 average depth of target. Like 1.3, that's not going to get it done. Let me tell you what, if you're discounting Stephon Diggs because of week 1 air yards, average depth of target, and you're not mentioning the fact that 3 of his 6 targets came inside the 10-yard line. Not a lot of air yards down there inside the 10-yard line. You're fooling yourself. You're playing yourself right there. He's going to have a big role as that quick route, getting the separation there near the line of scrimmage. He's going to get his production, but Tank Dell, not a guy that you should ignore either. 16.3 average depth of target. When he hits, he's going to hit big. So I think you got to live with the volatility with some of these guys because it's such a great room and a very uniquely talented offense.
Harmon's fired up today. It's got me fired up. I'm fired up now. What time is it? Hurry up, offense time. You know what we do. We throw some of your questions up. We give 25 seconds on the clock. We let everybody try and get as many of these answered as we possibly can. The first one comes from John Guy, who says, start Neighbors Dell, or Robinson Jr. in the flex. Hashtag AskFFL. Andy Behrens, what do you think?
Yeah, first of all, I want to compliment your roster here. I love all these options this week. Harmon just talked about Dell. He's a bit of a flyer in any given week, but he kind of had the same role in the opener that he had all last season. I like him, but I'm going to go with Robinson Jr. here. That matchup against the Giants is just too tasty.
All right, the next one, look, you had a second left. Boy, you're running efficient. The next one goes to Tara, and it comes from Chuck, who says, McConkey, McLaurin, Worthy in half PPR. Ask FFL. What do you think, Tara?
In any other situation, we'd probably be looking at Terry McLaurin and saying, this is our guy. He's got the talent. We love him. But unfortunately, right here, we have to go with Xavier Worthy right here. He is the one that we have to key in on. A lot of upside here. Sorry, I got a wee bit distracted here.
Oh, delay a game coming in. All right, week two, too. Like, we got to be better as an offense. All right, here we go. Matt Harmon. Matty Dub says start Baker over Burrow. James Conner over Rashad White. Decisions. Ask FFL.
Oh, man. So love how many bucks you got on your roster here. I'm going to go with James Conner over Rashad White. Great week one roll. That offense is kind of cooking from a run game perspective. And yes, I would start Baker over Burrow this week. No justification.
Well
Sorry,
done.
No justification.
Just got that in. All right, Robert Brown comes in next as PPR flex. Metcalf, Ridley, BTJ all have tough matchups. Andy Behrens, what do you say?
Yeah, you're not wrong. They all do have tough matchups. I can't trust Ridley after what we saw. I just can't do it after what we saw from Will Levis at opening week. That was brutal. It is close for me between Thomas, who I love, and DK Metcalf, but I'm going to lean Metcalf. I trust his quarterback just a little bit more, and I like his matchup just a little bit better.
You mean you don't trust a quarterback that just wildly throws it at the other team in a close game? I don't understand why. All right, we mentioned the Bears earlier. We talked a little Bears, but we haven't talked Caleb Williams. And one of my favorite shows that we have now, it's a new show on Yahoo Sports, new podcast, is Football 301. You heard Matt Harmon mention it earlier. Well, Nate Tice and Charles Robinson had an interesting conversation about Caleb Williams. Here's a little of it for you to check out.
I would imagine that's probably the worst their offense looks. Maybe like the entire Caleb Williams era. As hard as it is to be that good, like it's also hard to be consistently, that bad, as bad as they were throwing the ball on Sunday.
This is a good chance for them to get right with running the ball, and also just Caleb may feel more comfortable having not some of those uncharacteristic misses that he had last week. He still had some darts, some absolutely brilliant throws. He's so I know the creation stuff is so cool. The in the pocket stuff is so awesome. And I think this week against a heavy zone team, hopefully they don't break too many blitzes at him. Hope they can block up Danielle, block up Will Anderson. You can maybe see a little bit more of that on Sunday night.
The one thing I came back to with Caleb after the game is we know at times like he's been a guy that can kind of ride the emotional roller coaster, to say. But I want to see in game 2 if that was first game jitters, holy shit, I achieved my dream. I'm where I wanted to be, first pick in the draft. I made it. I cashed in every dream I had. Now you just got to settle in and actually just play the game.
All right, let's take a look at some fantasy chatter out there. Some of the most talked about players in the newly redesigned fantasy app. If you're not checking it out, shame on you. One, Jordan Mason, obviously. Reminds me of what I got Noshawn Moreno in 2009 when he Wally pipped someone to get the starting job. Helped me win my league. That's some positivity, Jason. J.K. Dobbins, somebody smartly points out, that guy 22, that he's only 25 years old. People seem to forget that. Dealt with a lot of bad luck to start his career, but if he can stay healthy, he will excel in this system. And then a lot of chatter on Lazard. If he can avoid the Butterfingers and Rodgers can stay healthy all year somehow, this guy could be a sneaky wide receiver sleeper from Gabriel. I love all the ifs that we've just come together with it. Yes, all of those things need to go right, and then it could happen. You guys are asking us questions on YouTube. I want to get some of those in. Salty Madden asked this, and this is important. A lot of people are wondering this. How big of an issue is Love not starting for a Jaden Reed owner? Tara, what do you think?
I think it's less of an issue for Reed and a full fade on everybody else. Reed can still get his on the ground. He can be used in creative ways. So I'm less concerned about him. It does cut off his upside there, but he's still a viable flex option. The other ones are the ones that I think are massively affected by Jordan Love and I'm worried about.
Andy Behrens, any thoughts on what to do with the Packers offense at this point?
Yeah, no, I think Tara nailed it there. I worry about Malik Willis being able to get the ball downfield. So, I have a couple of lineups where I had to put Christian Watson in because I had A.J. Brown, but I do not recommend that to anybody else. I don't think any of the Packers receivers are particularly strong plays, but I do agree with the idea that Reed is somebody that they manufacture some stuff for, right? They give him stuff very near the line of scrimmage sometimes. So I think there's going to be a few opportunities there. I just don't know that the Packers have enough to hang with the Colts today.
Yeah, I'd remind everybody that we saw how bad Will Levis looked, and the Titans still decided it wasn't even worth keeping Malik Willis in the building to try and see if he could compete with Will Levis. So he's only been there for like a week. We got another question from Ullman 3255. Jared Goff or Jaden Daniels? Matt Harmon, what do you think?
Oh, man. Look, I know people are obsessed with Jaden Daniels and the rushing upside and all that. You're going to need Jaden Daniels to run if he's going to score you fantasy points. And he will run. We saw it last week. But, man, I am not confident in that offense. And I get it. Like, the Giants are a vulnerable defense, but that offensive line is super problematic. That's a great defensive line there that the Giants have. Dexter Lawrence was a total game wrecker in week 1, even if the rest of the roster wasn't up to snuff. So I would go with Jared Goff, a guy that we know what we're getting there. We know what this offense looks like. And the fact that Jameson Williams was, so good and so useful in week 1, I think just boosts the ceiling of the offensive ecosystem overall.
Keep the questions coming on YouTube, and also you can do #AskFFL on X. Scott Pianowski still answering your questions out there. Big game Monday night, obviously, Eagles, Falcons. Everybody's got their eyes on that game coming up, and the Eagles favored by 6. The over-under on this 46.5. Want to get into some of the big storylines on this. Obviously, as we started the show, we let you know A.J. Brown not going to be in this game. Tara, what's your big angle on this that you've got your eye on?
I'm not too worried about the Eagles pass catchers, even with A.J. Brown out. It is the pass catchers on the other side of this one that I'm a little bit concerned about, and how much faith can we really, really have in Drake London and Kyle Pitts at this point. Drake London last week, only 2 receptions for 15 yards. Kyle Pitts grabbed the touchdown, so it made everything kind of seem okay, especially when compared to the absolute failures for fantasy tight ends across the board, but only 3 receptions for 26 yards. Yes, saved by the touchdown, but again, that production was just highly concerning. But again, I can find excuses for this one, even outside of Kirk Cousins, for why this was such a woefully underperforming effort here. Last week, Pittsburgh at its best and at their healthiest, they were a terrible matchup. So I really wasn't expecting them to come out guns blazing, even if I didn't expect it to be this bad. But this week, Atlanta gets a really dream matchup here in a situation where they're going to absolutely have to push volume. They're attacking a young and kind of vulnerable defense in their secondary there. They have the opportunity to step up, but it can be exploited here. In addition to that, again, we're going to have to chase points here. Volume is going to have to come, and it can't all just go to Bijan and Ray McLeod. So I do think that we could have a little uptake here from these guys, but how much can we actually trust them? That's the big question here.
Andy, what do you got your eyes on?
Yeah, listen, one of the biggest stories in the league this week, we're going to need Kirk Cousins to look a little bit more like the pre-injury version of himself and not so much like, end stage Matt Ryan or whatever that was in opening week. There's been a lot of discussion all week about the manner in which Atlanta seemed to scheme around Kirk's physical limitations last week. It was all shotgun and pistol. He did not move well in the pocket, didn't stretch the field very often, and he didn't seem comfortable generally. We can forgive some rust. Kirk was injured in week 8 last year, so it's only been 10 months. We also saw practice clips this week of him working more under center, throwing in a little play action, more of the traditional Kirk Cousins stuff. The man has thrown 17 touchdown passes and only 4 INTs off of play action over the last 2 years. He's really good at it. That's wheelhouse stuff for him. Last season, man, Philadelphia ranked next to last in the league, both in passing yards allowed and in passing touchdowns allowed. So we would be all over this matchup if we were confident in Cousins. We would be all over Drake London. We would be all over Kyle Pitts, as Tara mentioned. But I haven't ranked them aggressively this week either. If we can just get a normal Kirk Cousins game, if such a thing exists, it would just be incredibly reassuring.
So for me, when you look at this matchup, you mentioned normal games. My biggest question is, did we just see the new normal for Saquon in this offense? Because frankly, the way Kellen Moore schemed up what they were going to do with Saquon, the way he was used, and his productivity without a stack box in front of him, gave us not only greatness from Saquon, it gave us MVP caliber greatness. Like in a world where we constantly say, if you got Christian McCaffrey, you might just win your league. I think what we saw through 1 week is that Saquon belongs in that same conversation. And it is reminiscent of Christian McCaffrey leaving Carolina where injuries were an issue and finding his next life with the 49ers and being absolutely dominant. Like, that's some of what we saw from Saquon. I don't think we can sleep on this here, that a month and a half ago when people were prepping for their drafts, we were still imagining questions to why Saquon might not be effective. And I didn't have a lot of trust for Kellen Moore and the offense that we were going to see from the Eagles. After one game, looked at it and thought, my God, if that is the new version of Saquon, there are people that are going to win their league because they simply had the 5th pick in the draft and they lucked into grabbing Saquon when he was available. I think this game becomes important because we find out if this is actually the norm for what we should expect week in and week out. Matt Harmon, what do you got your eyes on?
Yeah, you talked about it, Fitz. I love what I saw out of the Eagles' run game in week 1. Got to give a shout out to Mekhi Becton, who was blocking like crazy in that game. That was awesome. But I want to talk about the Eagles' passing game here a little bit because you're right. We saw a well-designed run game. I thought we saw a passing game that was really well-designed and one that's going to prop up all of these Eagles pass catchers even further. And, you know, for full disclaimer here, what I'm going to say, it would sound a lot sexier if A.J. Brown was actually going to play Monday night, but it does matter over the rest of the season, and it still matters for some of those other players that we saw in week number 1. According to Fantasy Points data, Jalen Hurts on dropbacks with pre or during the snap motion, and he took the 12th most dropbacks of that kind in week number 1, which is a huge boost from what we saw in the previous Eagles offense. 9.56 yards per attempt, 134.5 passer rating. Both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith averaged over 3.3 yards per route run on plays with motion. And because Brown's not playing in this, I think we can talk about Devontae Smith here, because what we saw from Kellen Moore in this passing game in week 1 was not just, oh, motion is good, let's just motion players around. It was actually doing things, the motion, and particularly for Devontae Smith, it got him in the slot. 68% of his routes were from the slot, which I think is really good for a player of his archetype. It's going to allow him to get a bunch of layup catches. I think this week against the Falcons, if he's getting those slot reps, he is in line for potentially a pretty big game on Monday night. And going forward, I think he's going to have more of a season close to his 2022 output, not kind of that little bit of a letdown season that we got last year.
You should listen to Matt Harmon because he's on a roll. And that brings us to primetime picks. You know what we do? We have a snake draft where we go through one late afternoon game that we've picked. We go through the Sunday night game and we go through the Monday night game. We each have to pick one flex player from each of those games. You can only get one from each game. We go through the snake draft. We keep the standings throughout the course of the year. Last year, I was the champion. I should remind you yet again. But in week 1, I was not. In fact, Matt Harmon dominated all of us. Andy Behrens in second, me in third, Tera in fourth. And that's how we get our draft order for this week. So Tera, you are up first, but don't worry about it. It's just getting your sea legs under you. You got the first pick. The games we've got are Kansas City versus the Bengals, Chicago and Houston, and the game we just talked about, the Falcons and the Eagles. Who are you going with first?
You know, Fitz, I'm going to take the advice here of the reigning champion. I'm with you. You're the reigning champion until otherwise. You just talked about Saquon, so I'm taking Saquon Barkley as my first overall pick here. Again, I have him as the guy who I want to have as the RB1 overall this week in rankings. I think it's reasonable to go ahead and move him there. This is the guy who is going to have extreme volume. A.J. Brown out, so maybe we get even more of an uptick in volume in terms of receptions to him. So leaning on Saquon here to carry me to victory this week. I'm feeling more confident now. I'm feeling it.
That's a great pick, and that puts me on the clock next. And here's the thing, y'all, like, I'm in a bit of a slump. I'll admit that. And sometimes when you're in a bit of a slump, you just need a slump buster. And you don't get a slump buster by hitting singles. You try and hit home runs. Look, we just heard Andy Behrens break down great information about play action and effectiveness and possibility of Kirk Cousins and the problems with the Eagles defense. I'm going to bust this slump by taking Drake London, number 2. He's going to go off. It's going to be epic. I'm going to get these points galore out of this. Like, sometimes you just got to reach for it. I'm reaching a little bit, but you know what? I feel good about this. Play action is going to serve me. It will be my God in this one, and somehow I will come through it. Andy Behrens, now that I've shocked the world, what do you have for us?
Yeah, that shook up the draft board. I'm a little bit rattled after that. I am, part of me wants to take Joe Mixon for the reasons I described earlier, but I don't want to root for it, okay? I just don't want to root for it. I'm a Bears fan. I don't want to be sitting around all night rooting for Joe Mixon. So give me Bijan Robinson. He handled 23 touches in opening week, including 5 receptions. He was the clear featured runner. No worries about Tyler Algier. And he was the most reliable offensive weapon. When they were feeding him, that's when things looked good for Atlanta. So I'll take Bijan here.
And that means that Matt, you get 2 straight picks here. For the second straight week, Matt went from picking first to picking fourth. You get 2 straight. What do you got?
Yeah, it's really good to be me. And because you 3 have already taken some players from the Monday night game, I can just pass on that till my final pick here. So that's a little strategery for you folks at home. For my first pick, I'm going to take Isaiah Pacheco. The Bengals got absolutely hammered in the ground game in week number 1 by the New England Patriots. I think the Chiefs and their offensive line and their power running back can do that here this week. He's got a chance to be a top 5 running back. And because I don't care about the Bears, and it doesn't matter to me one bit if bad things happen to them on Sunday Night Football, but I do think Andy Behrens, who I love and appreciate as not just a colleague and as a friend, but as someone I also think is very smart. He had all that good analysis on Joe Mixon. What a wonderful week 1 he had. I'm going to follow that, and I will take Joe Mixon and hope he obliterates Andy's Bears.
Oh, wow. And now Andy's on the clock. Feel free to use your time instead of telling us your picks, just to, clap back here, Andy. But go ahead. You also got to get a pick in.
No. I said
I love and appreciate him. What is he clapping back for?
Really uncomfortable for me. I didn't want to have to think about it. It's probably going to go poorly for my Bears, but I've got hope and possibility right now. I'm going to take Jamar Chase here, and I'm probably going on the wrong side of that Bengals Chiefs game. But man, it's stuck in my head that Jamar Chase delivered one of the greatest single game receiving performances in NFL history against the Chiefs a few years ago. He's never had a quiet game against them. He's got over 500 receiving yards in 5 games against the Chiefs in his career. I want him. He's making a little bit of noise about not getting the ball last week. I thought Burrow looked fine. I think Chase is way more involved and has a big game. So give me him.
You got the right game, but the wrong receiver. And this is just feels like recency bias. I know when we work in fantasy football, it feels like we're already 3 months into the season. But about a week and a half ago, we watched Xavier Worthy absolutely just dominate his first game in a way that everybody sat back and said, whoa, look at that speed. That's going to happen again here. I understand that the Chiefs have so many weapons. I'm comfortable with any of them. But Xavier Worthy is going to get me some big touchdowns in this one. I can't believe he's still sitting available. Too good at that value to not take him. Tara, I've taken him off the board. Who do you got?
I'm not gonna lie, Fitz. Even if you had left Worthy there, I was still thinking about taking Rashee Rice over him. Again, this is the target hog in this offense. It was great to see the massive upside, the electric playmaking ability of Xavier Worthy. But when we're talking about Rashee Rice, we got receptions, we got targets, over 100 receiving yards last week. Again, no Hollywood here, so this offense is pretty much going to stay the same against a worse defense. So I'm taking Rashee here, and then I got to double up on the picks here, I guess. And while I think that Stephon Diggs was fantastic last week, Nico Collins is still the guy that I want first from that Texans receiving core. Wide receiver 1 of the Texans here. Another 100-plus yard receiving guy last week. Don't let the touchdowns fool you there with Stephon Diggs. Last week was the floor. We are getting the ceiling here with Nico Collins in this matchup. Nico is the guy that I want.
No, let the touchdowns fool you, because Diggs is going to get these targets inside that 10-yard range that Matt talked about earlier. There's no way that you're just walking to the sideline not forcing the ball to Stephon Diggs. So I'm taking Diggs as I just sit here and say, man, I've got all the wide receivers I could possibly want in this one. I feel pretty good. Andy Behrens, this leaves you the Sunday night game, and I don't want to call you a fraud if you don't take somebody, but I think you might be.
Well, don't worry. I've already telegraphed the fact that I want to be cheering for the player that I take in this game. So I'm going DJ Moore. Tara discussed him earlier. DJ is really the one offensive weapon for the Bears who can be fully trusted this week and pretty much in any week. Even if his opener was a little bit quiet, I thought he looked great. Keenan Allen is a major question mark tonight. Rome Odunze, a question mark. Seems like he wants to go, but it's clear that DJ Moore is not only the Bears' best receiver, but also their healthiest. I think he's in line for a huge target total.
All right, Matt, you get to clean this thing up. What do you got with your last pick?
Yeah, let me clean this mess of a draft board by you 3 up here by taking Devontae Smith. I mentioned it earlier. Love the role that we saw in week number 1 for Devontae Smith. Love the player that he is. I think with this utilization, his targets are going to be even more efficient. And yeah, the Falcons have some good players in the secondary, but because Smith is going to be moved around the formation, they can get some matchup advantages for what's going to be their best wide receiver on Monday night.
All right, we will keep you updated on how the draft goes, because the trash talking never ends, even amongst friends and especially on this show. In the meantime, Matt, Tara, let's get some fantasy face-off in where you guys can look at some of the top pickups.
Yeah, Tara, we're going to be talking about some tight ends in this section. But before we do have to update the viewers that there's some late breaking news that Jaguars tight end Evan Ingram from ESPN's Adam Schefter says that he suffered a hamstring injury in pregame warmups and is now out for today. So if you were counting on Ingram, make sure you find a replacement out there in the muck and the mire that is the tight end landscape. Maybe Colby Parkinson from the Rams, actually pretty decent pickup. He played a lot in week 1. But hey, good news for Christian Kirk, good news for Brian Thomas. They're probably going to get more targets in this game now. But Tara, to the order of business here, we've got to talk about one of the biggest stories from week number 1, which was Isaiah Likely, Ravens tight end, absolutely went ham against the Kansas City Chiefs in the season opener. So people are wondering, do I start this guy over some more established players? So he's the player we're going to be debating on today. So Tara, I think we should start right away with the obvious one, Isaiah Likely or his teammate, Mark Andrews, who caught 2 passes for 14 yards in that opener. Which tight end do we like more this week?
Matt, can I weasel out of it and say these guys are both tight end ones, so it's a-okay, start either one? No, I can't do that here. Mark Andrews over Isaiah Likely. I know it might make you uncomfortable to start the guy that looks like he took a clear backseat to Likely last week, but here's why I can't exactly write off Andrews as the tight end 1 in Baltimore. Because there aren't a lot of underlying statistics that really indicate that Andrews was being phased out in any way. Snap count wasn't an issue. Routes run wasn't an issue. So it wasn't as if they said, new game plan. We're going to put Mark Andrews out there blocking and we're just going to throw all the targets and all the attention onto Isaiah Likely. I don't think that happened. I think what happened is we're seeing an uptick in terms of snap count because they're using 2 tight ends at the same time here and looking at both of these guys as pass catchers. And I think, the one that kind of hurts here isn't going to be Mark Andrews. He'll still get his. I kind of think that your boy Rashad Bateman is the one that's going to be limited in terms of opportunity here, in terms of going behind Isaiah Likely. So Mark Andrews is still, I'm not turning away. We need to see one more week. I'm still starting Mark Andrews over Isaiah Likely, but Likely's still a tight end 1. So it's okay. It's okay. I'm not being hypocritical here.
Yeah, I just want to say for the record that I was going to totally be okay with you weaseling out of this question and say that both of them were starting, and then you had to say those mean things about Rashad Bateman. So now, yeah, I'm glad that you're on the record on this one. Let's move on to the next one, Tara. Let's talk about Brock Bowers, who didn't have the stat line that Isaiah Likely had in week 1, but did have some pretty interesting usage.
This one was tough. I'm not going to lie here. And it feels weird leaning into a rookie, but I'm leaning into Brock Bowers over Isaiah Likely here. 6 receptions on 8 targets last week, right off the bat. That was exactly what I needed to see in this desolate tight end land that we were already looking at. Obviously, this offense wants to lean on the tight end position, and if he's going to get that volume on a weekly basis, he's going to become one of potentially the more reliable tight ends in this league. Maybe the ceiling is not there. I don't know if 30-point fantasy games are in his future like Likely in terms of that Raiders offense. But in terms of the reliability and the comfort that I have in sending him out there, I got to go Bowers over Likely here. How about you?
I think I would go with Likely here simply because Fitz, cover your ears. One of these guys plays for the Ravens and Lamar Jackson, and the other one is going against that Ravens defense in this matchup and is going to be catching passes from Gardner Minshew. I wonder if we see more of Raiders tight end Michael Mayer in this one too. I think they could be a 12 personnel team, but look, the Ravens identity now is a 12 personnel team. Both Likely and Mark Andrews are going to be on the field together. So I think the role for Likely is going to be good. Maybe it's not quite as many targets every week as Brock Bowers, but the touchdown ceiling I think is higher. The yardage ceiling I think is higher with Likely. I'm buying a lot of what I saw in week 1. I don't want to buy how bad the Falcons offense was in week 1, Tara. You mentioned it that to use a Scott Pianowski quote, Kyle Pitts got a little bit of touchdown deodorant in week number 1 on that broken play. The only pass that Kirk Cousins threw out of the tackle box in week 1, by the way, was that touchdown to Kyle Pitts. How nervous are we about Pitts and just this offensive ecosystem? Are we nervous enough to go with Isaiah Likely over the former 4th overall pick in Kyle Pitts?
I am. Yeah, it's tough for me. I've gone back and forth on this one and been very uncomfortable with it. But Likely is the one that I want to lean into on this one. And when I'm looking at Isaiah Likely versus Kyle Pitts, it's volume. I talked about that volume for Brock Bowers in terms of somebody that I want to lean into here. But the thing is that with Kyle Pitts, if he's going to be getting 3 targets, I don't feel comfortable enough with this one, unfortunately. So it's Likely that I want to lean into.
I'm with you on this one as well. Honestly, yes, Kyle Pitts enjoyed the usage, the snaps that we saw in week 1. That was great, but man, I'm just so much more confident in the Ravens' offensive identity. It wasn't perfect in week 1, and they're still working through some things there on that side of the ball, transitioning Derrick Henry's rushing style with Lamar's rushing style. But that 12 personnel package, I do think, is set up well for them. So I'm going to go Likely over Kyle Pitts as well. I kind of need another prove it week for the Falcons offense before going back to them. Love it, Tara. That was great stuff. Let's throw it over to Fitz and Andy for some fantasy flyers because, hey, your team's probably already a nightmare at this point. Fitz's certainly is.
Oh, my God. It's brutal. All right, let's take a look at a couple of flyers here, Andy. Gus Edwards at Carolina. What do you think?
Yeah, listen, everyone is out on Gus Edwards after 1 week. He was among the most dropped players in Yahoo leagues. His roster percentage is tanked. J.K. Dobbins was great in the opener, but it was still very much a committee arrangement. He and Gus were splitting touches. No one should be under the impression that one guy rules that team's backfield. They were screaming at us all offseason that it was going to be a hot hand committee situation. Greg Roman said it time and again. I really like both Gus and Dobbins this week against a Carolina defense that, Tara talked about him at the top of the show. They just had no chance against the Saints running game last week. I feel like you can flex Gus with relative confidence. Really good chance he finds the end zone.
Yeah, I think you're right, by the way. Harbaugh is not going to care about fantasy football. He cares about hot hands. So 100%, this could be week in and week out. What about Colby Parkinson at Arizona?
Yeah, that was a good call by Harmon in the last segment. If you're looking deep at tight end, I really think Colby Parkinson of the Rams probably the answer. He caught 4 balls last week against the Lions while playing 89% of the snaps. He's almost never coming off the field. He also ran the second most routes among all tight ends in the NFL. I'm not going to try to convince you that he's some one-for-one replacement for Puka Nacua because he certainly is not. But Nakua's absence will definitely free up targets for other players, Parkinson included. Very clear the team trusts him, Matthew Stafford trusts him, and the Rams are going to keep throwing it this year. You will not find very many tight ends on the wire who can realistically draw 6 to 8 targets. Parkinson definitely one of them.
All right, let's bring everybody back in as we wrap things to get ready with the hurry-up offense. You know what happens. 25 seconds on the clock. We'll get the experts to chime in on your questions you've been submitting. Jordan, love that, says, #AskFFL. Jordan Mason, J.K. Dobbins, Josh Jacobs. Which 2 do I go with? Matt Harmon, what do you think?
Look, I said that Jordan Mason's a guy that's in your lineup every single week. I meant it. I think even over a guy like Josh Jacobs. So the tough thing here is Dobbins or Jacobs. I'm with Andy that Dobbins is going to split carries, but man, Panthers offense versus offense with defense versus Malik Willis's offense. Go with Dobbins.
Oh, he almost got there. All right, next up, Darkside Dogs says, what are your thoughts? Only one can start PPR League. DeAndre Swift, Brandon Ayuk, Chris Olave, or Trey McBride. Thanks in advance. Tara, what do you think?
Oh, this is a lot here. Running back here, it's Dobbins. It's Dobbins for sure. And then at wide receiver, should you replace any of them with Swift? No, I wouldn't replace any of them with Swift or McBride.
Ooh, we are out of sync on this. We're going to get it here right here. Andy Behrens, Indiana Moose. That has to come, Midwest. Devin Singletary, David Montgomery, or Gabe Davis. #AskFFL. What do you think?
Oh, man. Congrats to Gabe Davis for making his way into this question. I mean, he played a lot last week, but he didn't do a lot. This is going to be David Montgomery for me. It's a shootout of a game. This was that Bucs-Lions game last year in the playoffs, so fun. I think David Montgomery, any given week, has a really good shot to find the end zone.
There we go. We're back on track. Full Mafia name here, Jimmy Fingers. 4 choices for 1 flex spot. Zamir White, Chase Brown, Deontay Johnson, or Tyler Johnson. What do you think, Matt Harmon?
Oh, geez. I don't feel good about any of these players, honestly. It's like 3 disappointing players from week 1 and then Tyler Johnson, which I'm not totally willing to buy into just yet. Maybe I look like an idiot by the end of this, but I'll still go with Deontay Johnson. The volume was there in week 1.
Ooh, the negativity in the tone. Next up, Mike says, #AskFFL. Half PPR, sit one. Derrick Henry, Jordan Mason, Jonathan Taylor already started H-N this week. Thanks. What do you think, Tara?
Oh, this is so stressful. I love all of them. How do you even sit a single person out of this? Technically speaking, I think in theory it's Jordan Mason, but coming off of that game, it's painful to do so. But yeah, I think it has to be Jordan Mason that you're sitting here over. Yeah, that's crazy.
Congratulations to Mike for being in a fantasy football league with one other person. All right, Mischief Managed says, ask FFL, I've got Nakua on IR. I'm not out of a wide receiver, so I was thinking of picking up Wandell for now. I'm curious to see how the New York Giant quarterback situation progresses. Thoughts, Andy Behrens?
Yeah, I mean, the stat that I always come back to with the Giants, and I get it, Wandale saw a bunch of targets last week. Daniel Jones has never delivered an 800-yard receiver in his NFL career, so I'm kind of out on the Giants receiving core.
Let's get one more quick one in here. Miguel Vasquez, this is good ones. Play or sit Demarcus Robinson or Alexander Madison? What do you think, Matt Harmon?
Yeah, I think this is clearly Demarcus Robinson. Look, Alexander Madison, interesting usage in week 1. He ran more routes, a lot more routes than Zamir White. He also caught the touchdown. So maybe he ends up earning more work. I think it's nice you have him on your bench. But Robinson right now, like I said early in the show, locked into that X receiver role against a beatable Arizona Cardinals defense. He's the one I'd go with.
Don't forget, we're back every Thursday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern and each and every Sunday at noon to help you perfect your fantasy lineup. You know that's going to be happening. In the meantime, it's time for kickoff. We hope you guys have great success today and everybody wins, especially me. Thanks for watching the Fantasy Football Live presented by Ram Trucks. He's Matt Harmon. He's Andy Behrens, Tera Roberts. I'm Jason Fitz. We appreciate you hanging out with us.